Hey guys, Eugene here, and today I'm going to take you through one of my leg and arm workouts. Now, I haven't done one of these videos in a little while, namely because I didn't want to keep putting out these videos if you guys weren't taking something valuable away from them. So what I did was I took a little bit of time to read through all the YouTube comments, to read through all the messages I was getting on Facebook and on Instagram, and just worked out what it was that you guys were really asking me to go deep on. And what I came back with was you guys care a lot more about program design and periodization and learning more about that with respect to these training videos. So what we're talking about with program design and periodization is, if you've seen my older videos, you would have heard me talking a lot about how each session is interrelated. Sessions aren't separate entities. What you do today in today's training session is going to influence and impact what you can do tomorrow or the weeks and months thereafter. Everything has some kind of interrelation. In the same respect, what you do today has been influenced by what you did previously. Setting that up in a long-term scheme is essentially what program design and periodization is all about. It's not just about going into the gym and randomly picking exercises, sets, and reps because they look cool on Instagram, but because it fits in to what you're trying to achieve with your long-term goal. So what I'm going to do over the next few videos is take you through my leg and arm workouts specifically. Because in this current phase of training, I have 3 different leg and arm workouts and they all interrelate with one another. And I want to show you guys how that is set up. It's not just about me changing reps and sets, though that does change as well, but I'm looking specifically at movements and how the movements I choose are integrating my own individual biomechanics, but also setting me up to be able to handle different exercises down the road. Now, if you guys care a lot about my own individual body part split and want to learn more about body part splits, maybe in terms of how to develop one for yourself or how to pick the right one for you at your given moment in time, leave me a comment below and I'll be sure to record something specifically on training splits. But for now, let's get into today's workout. Hope you guys enjoy it. Okay, so starting off today's session with some isometric activations for the deep neck flexors. So these are the muscles that sit really deep around the cervical spine or the neck. So in a similar way that we think about the transverse abdominis or the internal external obliques to stabilize the lower back and as our core musculature, we have similar core muscles surrounding the neck. And the thing is, if these muscles get weak due to poor posture, poor technique, poor activation, etc., what happens is they get a overcompensation of muscles like the sternocleidomastoid or the scalenes at the front of the neck. And typically it's where you start to feel things like headaches or tightness through the neck, difficulty breathing, lots of mouth breathing, tightness in the traps, or even inability to activate the delts or the lats or the mid-lower back sufficiently. So what I'm doing is pushing my hands into the wall to spread my scapula, open up the thoracic spine, and I'm pulling my head back into a double chin, into a neck flexion there, and holding for about 5-6 seconds. And you can see me there also rotating left to right in subsequent sets. So what happens is the more activation you can get through these deep muscles just as a wake-up drill, you won't necessarily feel anything intensely, but the more you can wake up these muscles and hold some sort of active tension in there, the better in terms of scapular function, scapular mobility, in terms of reducing shoulder pain, because you'll have a lot less residual tightness in all the accessory muscles around the neck, like the pecs and the front delt. So it's something that I've been doing for quite a while and I really enjoy playing with this, and I'll throw it in between most of my sets on upper body, but particularly arms. So you're seeing here on the preacher curl, the side view, before my set, I'm locking my elbows back. You would have seen there, I just pulled the shoulder blades back and down to lock that upper arm firmly against the pad. That's a really, really important thing there. I'm not just sitting there passively and letting my arms curl up loosely. I'm thinking about creating as much total body intramuscular tension as possible. And this is something that should be a theme on every exercise. Even the isolations like this, you should be trying to use every single muscle fiber possible to brace and build a stable base. Because a more stable base means more output from the target muscle, in this case the biceps, or on the dips the triceps, which is really, really an overlooked factor when it comes to proper activation and reducing things like loading through the connective tissues and the tendons. So I was working up, here are my work sets on dips and on preacher curls. I ended up doing 2 sets on each exercise. which if you've seen my last videos from a few months ago, I was only doing one work set for each exercise and each body part, really. What I've done over the last couple of months is slowly built up my volume and exercise intensity, exercise variety and complexity to be able to handle this kind of workload, because that is obviously going to be one of the biggest contributors to overall growth of muscle tissue. It's not just about hitting the muscle groups, but hitting it with as much volume and intensity at which you can recover from as well. So it takes that slow approach to build up your work capacity and maximal tolerable volume over time. So the first work set, I aimed to hit mechanical failure at around 8 to 10 reps. I didn't want to grind out anything further because I knew I did have the secondary set after that. The second set is where I added in extra slow isometrics and added in a rest pause set that you'll see on the tricep dips in a sec. So the big thing here to think about as well is the actual complexity or the neurological demand that these movements do contribute to the nervous system. So something like dips is very, very complex and demanding exercise when compared to something like a tricep pushdown, for example. So because of this and because of the sheer weight that you can end up using, so like on here I'm doing 130 or 140 pound dips on top of my body weight, that's significant loading that the nervous system has to recover from. And when you add in the intensifiers like a rest pause or force reps or slow eccentrics, it becomes even more demanding. Now, that's something that you do need to be taking into account. You're going to see in the other sessions I upload in the next couple of weeks for these leg and arm routines, there's going to be less neurological demand. But on this session, the high demand and high nervous output of the dips and to a lesser extent the preacher curls, that makes up for what's going to happen with the lower body exercises that you're going to see later in this session. So it's all about looking at balancing your neurological output in each session to make sure that you're not overtaxing yourself in any one session, and at the same time you're also allowing yourself plenty of time and resources to be able to recover without getting overstimulated or understimulated to the point where you won't necessarily create enough of a response in your muscle activation and overall growth potential. So I hope you guys enjoy the faces I'm pulling here on the preacher curl. I like to close my eyes sometimes. That's why a lot of the videos actually can't see my face, but the eyes are closed. And I do pull some pretty funny faces. For me, it's all about internalizing. So you'll see here, no matter how intensely the set is going, how much pain I'm in, I guess, execution remains paramount. Execution is always there. My elbow pits are pointing upwards and not pointing in together. My humerus is staying as externally rotated as possible, and I'm keeping the same range of motion and as much of the pace as possible. So to finish with, I went over to the squat curls, just for a couple of light rep pump sets to finish things off, as well as being a good exercise to just pump up the biceps and get a good flush through, especially the short head with this brace position. It's also what I would call a positional exercise, where due to the loading mechanism, the way that the weight pulls up away from my center of gravity, and I've got a counterbalance with my hips, my glutes, my lower back, it creates a very, very unique contraction through the core. And it puts a lot of different demands through the midsection, which is going to set me up for my future workouts where I'm going to be doing a lot more squat patterns. You can see how it very, very nicely blends into a typical squat motion without me necessarily loading up with a heavy squat. But creating these kind of positional exercises and opportunities to be doing them is a good thing to sprinkle in through as many of your workouts as possible, but particularly foundational and mobility-based sessions. So in between each set, I think I did 3 sets there, I was doing some straddle single leg pike pulses, as you can see here, aiming to create as much end range hip flexion as possible to overload the iliacus, the psoas, and a little bit of the rec fem. But due to the position here of knee extension, the rec fem is already going to be somewhat weakened by being in that shortened position. But it's important here to try to build up this strength, because again, if you think about it a little bit more laterally, what's happening here is you're emulating the bottom position of a squat, where the femur angle is relative to the hip. So creating stability there with no weight at all, with minimal loading, and trying to hold isometrics and create that tension there is a really, really important thing to carry over to future squat or deadlift sessions. It does create a good amount of contraction through the glutes as well, and you do need to create active tension and compression through the midsection. So the entire time there, I'm actively flexing down on my abs to blow everything out and to stabilize through the pelvis. And that's really, really key there to make that exercise significantly harder. So moving on, what you can see here is the first primary leg exercise for the day, which is a single leg press. So I really like this particular machine because it allows me to put the other leg up and hold it there to align my pelvis. What you're seeing here is I'm doing just a few different proprioceptive things. I'm pushing back on the knee to make sure it stays in good alignment. I'm palpating the glutes, palpating the midsection to make sure that things are tracking properly. I'm reaching that extra range of depth that I was trying to create with the Pike pulse, and I'm maintaining that firm abdominal brace and compression and breathing right into my diaphragm to stabilize my pelvis as much as possible. What's going to happen here, similar to the preacher curls, the more stability you can create, the more output you're going to get from the target muscles like the quads, glutes, hamstrings. So one thing, it's a technical thing to make sure things are staying technically sound and you're not going to snap any of your joints, but it's also about trying to perform as much as possible. Now, due to the support that's provided from something like a leg press, it isn't that neurologically demanding. So it's something where I can push it, and I'm aiming here to push this set to complete failure, which I do hit at one point, which you're going to see in a sec. I wouldn't necessarily do this on a heavier loading exercise, and I wouldn't necessarily do this on something like a squat. It's more complex in nature. But because the relative loading is less, because it's a single leg movement, it's unilateral, and because it's supported in a press machine, I feel a lot more confident with being able to push it to absolute failure points. And of course, you are going to create some kind of demand on the nervous system, but relatively speaking, there's going to be that much more demand being placed metabolically on the target muscle tissues without creating as much of that stress and systemic fatigue predominantly on the nervous system. I know it sounds kind of repetitious there, but you're going to see that becoming much more relevant through the next few phases. And as a general theme through all of my training, it's what I've tried to do, try to manipulate and master neurological versus metabolic demands on the brain and on the local muscle tissue, because that's what training really boils down to, being able to specifically manage those two variables. So after my work sets there, I went over to the hack squat. See me here, I've got a little bit of a heel elevation. I'm staying through the ball of my feet and trying to reach this end range position again to fully stretch out the teardrop muscle, the VMO, and to open up through my quads as much as possible. So I'm focusing on high reps. I did about 25 to 35 reps in each set here and worked quickly as a superset between this and leg curls, just for a general pump stimulus. I do want to train this and open up the fascia a little bit. I'm using this as a loosening exercise to prepare me for, again, the future exercises in this phase where I'm going to be hitting a lot more squat variations. When it comes to exercises like this, and they can place a lot of stress on and strain on the quad tendons, the patella tendons, but at the same time, it's also what you need to be doing to strengthen up those regions. So you may need to work into this with some lighter exercises to begin with, to build up that base in quad tendon strength. But overall, it is about placing that maximal stretch on the VMO. So I'm showing the leg curl here from a couple of different angles, not just to show you how good my ass looks, but more importantly, to show you how I'm locking everything down and building that stable base. I'm thinking not about curling the pads all the way up to my ass. You'll see there I'm not actually hitting a complete, I guess you can call, full range of motion. But what I'm thinking about there is locking down the pelvis, locking down the glutes, bracing the abs, and getting a slight degree of hip extension. As I pull up with my hamstrings, they're reaching a maximal contraction at that position. If I went any higher, it would be coming from things like lumbar extension and come through my lower back, or be through my glutes. Whereas here I'm trying to nail just the medial heads of the hamstrings. So by maintaining hip extension, it locks out some of the outer biceps femoris, and it also helps to recruit more and more through specifically just the medial hamstrings, which are important for knee tracking and overall knee health. So that's it for today's session. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to leave me a comment below to let me know what you think, let me know any thoughts, and I will see you guys next time.